Good morning, everyone. So today I'm going to be introducing the research I've been doing for about 10, 11 months now on Syria. So the title of my research is Growing and Belonging as a Nation. It's about children's magazines in non-state opposition groups within Syria during the civil war. So for those who don't know, this is Syria. This is what it looks like. It's in the Middle East. And we're going to be looking mainly at 4 regions for the magazines. So we have one over here, one here, one here, and one here. So first and foremost, I think that it's necessary to just give you a tiny bit of context on Syria. So, is it working? Okay. So Syria has been a region that was first controlled by the Ottoman Empire. So it was until 1918, a region with diversity, with many different religious groups that were living within governorates, so it was called the millets. And so they were controlled mainly in terms of it was kind of local governments with a sultan that was controlling the entire empire. After that, we had a French mandate, so the French were taking care of the region. They were separating the people between groups because that's how they perceived it. After that, we had the beginning of the regime of al-Assad. So first with Hafez al-Assad, and then Bashar al-Assad, his son. They started a dictatorship in Syria that was first based on trying to maintain a Syrian nationalism. However, it was also a period of instability that led to what we know now as the Syrian Civil War, which was the contestation of the dictatorship in Syria. Okay, so before I start this presentation, I would like you to know 2 words that are very important in the scholarship. First, there is the word sectarianism. Sectarianism is defined in many ways. We're going to use it today as the division between sects, or as the ethno-religious, so ethnic and religious, divisions between groups, as a political and social process. So, yeah. The word nationalism, I'm sure you already know it. We have a very strong nationalism within the United States. It's the political process of unification of a group under one common identity. So here in the United States, it would be American. And so first, what do scholars say about sectarianism in Syria? That is the main topic when we look at the scholarship. Well, first of all, there was the primordialists, the people who said that Syria was managed by ancient hatred. It was a lot of different groups that were fighting over religious issues. However, that is a primordialist vision, which means that it is a vision that is now refuted for being, for viewing people as different and as backwards. After that, we see that Balanche, Lakic, and Phillips started talking about the centralization of power in Syria in the hands of elites. And so those elites, they were distinguishing them as Alawites, who are it's basically Shia. So we have the Shia and the Sunni in Syria. The Shia are the Alawites. And so what those authors say is that there's a centralization of power in their hands. According to Matty Weitzman, there was a lot of foreign influences in Syria during the Syrian Civil War. So according to him, the divisions in Syria are due to all those powers around Syria trying to influence the politics. There's also another theory that says that it's a product of low state capacity, so the inability of the state to give resources to the population so that they can survive, and so the instability of the institutions, and that is by Zeka. And finally, we have the author Haddad, who says that there's a reification of sect-centric symbols. Sect-centric is important here in the context of instability. And so sect-centric, what does it mean? It's how a sect will have some symbols, so how a group will have common myths and symbols together, and how they will express those symbols. It's different from sectarian because sectarian has a connotation. So if you hear me say sect-centric during this presentation, it's because sectarian has a very negative connotation when talking about different groups. And so what was the gap that I found in this literature and what do I study or how do I study that gap. So the gap that I found was that most of the research was looking at the elites during the Syrian civil war. They were not looking at what the population says about the civil war. And so I was wondering, how can we look at what the population is saying instead of what is the elite saying? What are the people in power saying about the civil war? There is this assumption that sectarianism is the main framework of identity. There is the assumption that the elites are controlling people, dividing them between groups so that they fight and the elites get more power. However, that is a vision that does not encompass what the majority of the population says. So for this reason, I decided to look at children's magazines. Children's magazines are a great resource just because, first of all, they're easy in their words. They don't use many different words that we might not know about. And also because they project the expectations that people have for their children. They are supposed to raise the children. They're instigating morals, values, things that the actual adults of the nation would like to see in the Syria of the future. And how do they explain the Syrian civil war to children? And so for this reason, I decided to study 4 magazines. So the first magazine that I'm looking at is Sununu Mag. It was published between June 2014 and April 2015. It has a total of 10 issues, and it comes from the coast of Syria, so very much on the west northern coast of Syria. It is a very small magazine. The authors are the Sununu family, so we don't really know who it is. There's no way of finding out as of right now for me as an undergrad. Then I studied Zarwak, which is in English, boat. So this magazine had a lot more issues. It had 30 issues between 2013 and 2016. Then we had Paper Plane, which had 105 issues, so a lot more to study. And it was near Damascus, which is the capital of Syria. And finally, we have Jasmine Color over here, which was published between 2012 and 2013. It only has 6 issues. And it was published in the eastern region of Syria, where it was a lot more rural and where the war started earlier, where the tanks directly started attacking. So what did I notice in my research? I noticed 3 main themes. First, I found that there was the theme of revolution and sectarianism. Then I noticed the theme of creating a national identity within Syria. And finally, I looked at the negotiation of identities within democracy and human rights within that framework. So throughout my presentation, I'm going to show you different pages. I'm not going to have time to explain every page because it's stories and it would take too much time. So trust me, those pages are about the theme. First and foremost, I found that there is a topic of oppression and of tyrants being there. They are blaming, in that social movement that was the Syrian civil war, we see that they're saying that the enemy, the construction of the enemy is the tyrants, the people who are in power, who are trying to target the population. So, for example, the Apple and Receiver talks about how they're being oppressed by the regime. Then we see that there is the issue of sectarianism that is talked about. However, it is not talked about as something that is inherent in the population. It is not something that the population believes in and started fighting with. There might have been acts of sectarianism. However, it's not what the population believes is the most important issue in Syria. Instead, they say that the regime is the reason why they're fighting, that the regime is trying to create those tensions. In the fan and the heater, for example, the fan up there and the heater have the same purpose. They're trying to maintain the temperature of the house. However, there's this little fly going around in the house, and it is trying to create tensions. Finally, there is also the issue of clientelism, corruption, and the shabihas. The shabihas are people who are being paid by the regime, who are being paid by the regime to create attacks in Syria. And so we see that in the magazines they are specifically saying that, that the regime is not acting on its own, that there are people within the population that is helping the regime. So the question of who do I trust is really a big problem in terms of identity. How are you supposed to feel comfortable in your identity when, or how are you supposed to feel like you are one nation if there are so many things going on around with a lack of trust? Then, as I said, there's the reconstructing of the myth of Syria. So that is the main thing that I found in those magazines. Of course, sectarianism has been an issue because of the regime, as they're saying in the magazines. However, the main thing that they're trying to teach their children is that Syria is a place that they should love and that they belong to. And so we see that first with the question of the homeland. So that first page is a poem. It is a poem on the homeland and how the homeland is a place where people are going to be able to grow, are going to be able to love each other, etc. Similarly with this page, as you see, it's the question of we're all in one home and therefore there is love among us because it's one house, one roof. With that, there's the question of martyrs. The martyrs, if anyone does not know, it's the people who will die for a cause. So people will fight and die for a cause. Those people are the true lovers of Syria. They're the people who will give their blood for Syria. They are the representation of what the Syrian person must be, which is dying for freedom and dying for the freedom of Syria as a whole from authoritarian control. But that is a very big topic, specifically to make children understand why the civil war is happening and what is going on around them. They see a lot of death and war, of course. Therefore, building the myth of Syria through these martyrs and the love they give to their country is a very important topic. And finally, there is the question of being Syrian above all. You are not Shia, you are not Sunni, you are not Christian, you are a Syrian. And so we see that through sentences, through the story, which was also talking about sectarianism. It's also the idea that we're one for one cause, which is Syria. There are those really nice quotes that are saying, for example, you're an intelligent artist, you're Syrian, and that is enough. Those things remind the Syrian children that one day they will be the face of glory, they will be the face of freedom, they will be the face of Syria, and that for that they need to unite under one nation and one population. And so all of that is within one context. It's the context of democracy and freedom. So what we see during that time in 2011 is the Arab Springs throughout the Middle East. And it is a movement for democracy, freedom, the right to govern yourself, to not be governed by an authoritarian leader. And so we see that excessively in those magazines. The idea is that we're fighting not just to fight or to gain power, we're fighting to promote unity and diversity. This whole text is about pluralism and about how it is important to have very different people within one nation because we're all doing it for the purpose of democracy. And so the question is, so what? Compared to what we see in the scholarly discourse, which is that sectarianism is a problem within the whole Syrian nation, that is all due to the elites and their control, how it is due to low state capacity. Yes, there are many different factors for a war, but what we see in those magazines is that the sectarian narratives are downplayed. They're present, they're talked about, but they're downplayed for the purpose of creating a nation. They're presented as something that is caused by an evil actor that must be overcome by the population as a whole. And so the perceived disruption in Syria is caused by people who are not faithful to the population, who are not faithful to what the nation of Syria represents. And instead, everyone should aim for democracy. That differs from scholarly literature in terms of we're looking at the population. We're first of all looking at the population and what they believe in, but also we're looking at a new framework within Syria, which is they're aiming for diversity and democracy which is something that is not very much talked about. And I have my citations for y'all, but yeah, thank you.
What an amazing presentation to start with. I'm so impressed. That was such a fascinating topic. You were so good at explaining context that we needed for people who may not know as much about Syria. You did amazing. I'd like to open it up to Dawn for questions or comments.
Thank you so much. I just wonder, when you analyze all of these magazines, how was your process of reading them? Like, did you translate them through what?
So unfortunately, that's something that Dr. Katinsley, Dina, and I were trying to figure out, is that there is no AI that will look into a PDF and directly translate. So for that, I had to use Google Translate. Unfortunately, I do not speak Arabic. So I had to use Google Translate and make sure with Khadija, who works in our office and who speaks Arabic, and with Dr. Katinsley, that some words were correct. But Google Translate has very much improved since I was a kid, and it is now pretty correct in terms of translation. Yeah.
Did you look into other magazines, and why did you choose these four?
So there are not that many magazines available. There were some other magazines. I decided to choose these four because, first of all, they were the least Western one. We see that some of them have very much a Western influence in the way because they're giving donation. So Boat, for example, starting issue 25, does not represent what the population is thinking anymore. It is owned by European donors. And so we see that because the donors are written on the issues. And it starts being all about those Disney movies that it's not at all like the other magazines that I've studied, and so I did not look at those. I also tried to look at different regions within Syria. So my goal was to look at what was happening in Deir ez-Zor, in Latakia, in Damascus, in Idlib, so in 4 different regions. And also, I did not have much time. It was only a year.
No, I'm very interested. I think the idea of looking at children's magazines is very key, right? You're talking about shaping, young people, right, and how they view the world. So I have actually a comment. I hope you take it as it's meant. It's meant very well. I would maybe temper down some of your conclusions as they are presented here. I don't know that you can say much about the population. You can say something about the people who publish these magazines. Right, and what they're trying to achieve and to accomplish. And that's one sector of the media, right? I'm sure there are other media outlets that are trying to be honest, right? Perhaps. So I don't know that you know the population of Syria or the readership, right, who they are.
Yeah, no, I can't.
You know about the people who publish these magazines and they have this project.
Yeah, so to answer that, those people don't have specific political goals. They do not express like trying to govern or trying to attain some actual political like power. They do not represent most of the population. However, they do represent some non-state actors, which are located in different regions. The problem with looking into sources in Syria is that it's very restricted, and I was lucky to find this website that is just an independent, so basically it's an independent journalist association that created a little bit later in the Civil War an archive website where they gather most of the media that they were able to retrieve. And so they have a section for children magazines, and so I looked through that, but they lack a lot of issues. They probably don't have all the press, and they're not able to say how many people have read the magazines or how much, like if it was printed that much or if it was online. Those are information that are lacking, and hopefully we'll get more information.
I think it's fascinating that it's a story of there's a battle for creating a narrative about who are we, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think anybody living in the world today, including this country, should realize that they are targets for their own narratives, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate the fact that you presented this.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, simplistic, cynical elites that are just blindly controlling the population. They're saying, oh yeah, it's religion, that's your enemy, right? And the discussion that you're stepping into is a group of scholars over the past 2 or 3 years that have said, well, wait a minute, what's this look like from below? And the immediate pushback that people in the context that you're writing in is, all right, you can say that people from below, like, yeah, sure, this idea of elites doing all this and being the puppeteers, that's on the one hand, but they always ask, well, why does it work then? Why does it work with the population? Right? And I think your research is sitting right in between those two spectrums, right? The fact that you're using children's magazines, I mean, you want to look at what a nation says, look at what they tell their children, right? Children have always been the battleground for the soul of the nation. So trying to get at this image of Syria from below through the context of children's magazines, I think it's a very good approach to do something that is incredibly hard. I mean, there's a reason why people haven't done this bottom-up approach until now. It's incredibly difficult. So I'll give you the opposite side of that spectrum. Push the sources as far as you absolutely can. Say something provocative, throw it out there and see what happens.
Right now?
Yeah. As you continue your research.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna stop it there so I can invite up Dr. Tinsley. Let's give Zelie another hand.
Great.
That's it.
Oh, this is great. Oh, I'm so proud of you. Did all the hard work. The real parts in DC.
Yeah.
Great.
Why don't we just start? Yeah, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I'll
Quick,
say a
real
couple
quick?
things. Oh my gosh. Zelie was actually in one of the first classes I ever taught here. This is back when I was still an adjunct. And I remember you coming up to me because we had a reading from Fanar Haddad. It was about sectarianism in Iraq. And I instantly realized that Zelie was obsessing over this as much as I was. I was still writing my dissertation at the time. And having you come to office hours to talk about this. And then we were very fortunate to have the opportunity to continue, some of this research, these discussions about religious violence. And then we did the internship last semester, the research internship, and then we were able to continue with your honors thesis. And I just think it's incredible to have, that's really what it takes, a year, right? More, and I'm sure you're aware of that, right? I mean, critical thinking, living in a capitalist society isn't conducive to critical thinking, right? But I'm just so proud of your work, what you've done, and I gotta brag for you for a second. So Zelie is actually traveling to Washington, D.C., as is Guillaume, who's about to present. Middle Eastern Studies Association annual conference. So this isn't a local conference, this is like worldwide. Middle Eastern Studies, the whole thing. And I actually have some stats to back up what accomplishment this was. Roughly 3,000 students, or 300 students applied to present. They accepted 20. Zelie and Guillaume were 2 of the students that they accepted. So that speaks entirely not only the quality of your work, but your capability as scholars. So really, it's a major accomplishment, and thank you all so much.
Great.